Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Brian Carpenter. I'm the curator of Native American materials here at the American Philosophical Society. Welcome. I'd like to welcome you to today's virtual discussion with Patricia Anderson to talk about her new book, Revitalization Lexicography, The Making of the New Tunica Dictionary, which was published by University of Arizona Press in 2020. I'm really glad that so many of you have joined us today. We'd like to begin by noting that the American Philosophical Society resides in Lenapehoking, which is the homeland of the Lenape people, whose historical relationships with the land continue to this day. The APS acknowledges with respect their continued presence and perseverance, and we would also like to express our thanks for the past and ongoing generosity of many Indigenous communities and individuals who have offered their guidance, their expertise, and many opportunities for collaboration. For those of you joining us for the first time, the American Philosophical Society was founded by Benjamin Franklin in 1743. The society is a catalyst for the discovery of new knowledge. Election to membership honors those who have made exceptionally significant contributions to science, the arts and humanities, and public life. The Society promotes research by providing over $1.5 million in research grants a year, primarily to younger scholars who need support the most. Our library and museum collections and research centers serve scholars and visitors from across the globe. So please check out our website, amphilsoc.org, to learn more about what we do and for news of forthcoming events. We are using our Zoom webinar for today's discussion, so don't worry, you've all been muted, so you don't have to worry about doing that yourself. If you have a question, please use the Q&A button, which is at the bottom center of your navigation bar. You can type your question in there at any time. There will be time at the end for questions with our speaker. We are also excited to offer closed captioning for today's virtual discussion. If you would like to use it during the panel, please click on the CC box on the bottom navigation bar of Zoom. It's just to the right of the Q&A button. Our speaker today is Patricia Anderson. Dr. Anderson has been an active member of the Tunica Language Project since 2011. She received a PhD from Tulane University for her work on the new Tunica Dictionary. In addition to preparing the print Tunica Dictionary, Anderson also created the Tunica Dictionary app for Android and is in the process of developing an app for iPhones also. As a software developer by day and language revitalizationist by night, Anderson's research focuses on the intersection of language revitalization and technology. Her current language work includes a project funded by the National Science Foundation to create an enhanced digital experience with Tunica language materials housed here at the APS Library and Museum. With that, it's my pleasure to hand it over to Patricia. It's all yours.
All right, I'll give the machine a second to warm up here and get things shared. Thank you so much, Brian, for the introduction, and thank you everyone for joining me today. Zoom is, hang on, let me refresh my Zoom screen. And here we go. All right. Looks like we're live. All right. Yeah, I'm very excited to speak with you today. As Brian mentioned, my name is Patricia Anderson, and revitalization lexicography is a topic that I really enjoy and really passionate about. So thank you for giving me this platform to share some of the work that I have done on it with you all. Revitalization lexicography is this really interesting genre and exploring dictionaries as one tool among many that can be used to help reverse language shift or language decline. And so what would a talk about dictionaries be if we didn't start with a definition? So I'm going to include a definition. It's not Merriam-Webster, don't worry. Here we go. It is of my own devise, language revitalization, noun, and a definition. Yaratame tu ikich, luchchi wo piratich. You'll notice that definition is not in English. It is in Tunica, the Tunica language. The Tunica language is what brought me to this concept of revitalization lexicography. And so I feel it's only appropriate that that's where we start with our definition. I've been working with the Tunica community and the Tunica language for 10 years now. Don't worry, we'll come back to this definition. But here I am, let's see, 10 years younger. And when I started working on the revitalization project, it was revitalization in general. It wasn't dictionary specific. And the dictionary process actually started around 2013, 2014. And at that time, a few years into our revitalization, there was a sense from folks working on the language that we wanted a dictionary. We felt it would be helpful to the revitalization process. But we didn't really have a clear idea of why we had that sense. And we didn't really have a clear idea of how we could implement a dictionary in such a way that would be helpful to bringing back the language. Yes, you could look up words. Sure, like that's a function of a dictionary that we acknowledged we wanted. But there was also this shared sense that a dictionary, it could do more. It could be more than just this sort of lifeless repository where you look up words. And so one of the starting points in this work was just to look at other dictionaries. What do other folks do, other communities do, major world languages do, indigenous languages, minority languages, a variety of dictionaries. And started sussing out different characteristics of dictionaries that might be helpful for revitalization, and what are the characteristics that are not as helpful? There's some characteristics of dictionaries that are actually sort of antithetical to the process of language revitalization in terms of not helping a language come back and actually prescribing certain ways language works. But there's other things that can be extrapolated, can be generalized. And so with these other dictionaries and these other language decisions, looking at how they design a dictionary, it started to solidify for me this concept of revitalization lexicography as a genre. And so I'm going to go back to our definition. This will be in English for now. So the genre of revitalization lexicography really is defined by dictionaries that are built with an explicit purpose to revitalize language shift. Or excuse me, reverse language shift. Revitalizing the language. So obviously revitalization is definitional to the genre, hence the name. But this explicitness, this intentionality is also really important. Just because a dictionary encodes a language, a minority language, an indigenous language, any language that elsewhere is trying to revitalize, the dictionary itself will make different decisions if you are doing it for language revitalization. Sorry, I just saw a chat and the blinking lights still distract me. I will minimize my chat. All right, cool. So there are definitely dictionaries out there that encode language. For example, Tunica. There are an older Tunica dictionary. There's Tunica in it, but it's very clearly not a revitalization dictionary by any means a stretch of the imagination. It's not intended to create new speakers or intended to engage with learners in a specific way that helps bring the language to new domains. And so this intentionality is really important. A second aspect of revitalization lexicography is this recognition that revitalization as a general activity, it looks very different from community to community. And therefore, dictionaries that are engaged in the revitalization process are also going to look different from community to community. So communities have different goals when they're trying to revitalize. A community that has a goal to get a language taught in a classroom, in a formal education setting, the needs that they have will be different. They may need a dictionary that standardizes or presents certain language that then you can get included in a curriculum or included on tests that can be administered. That's going to be a very different kind of dictionary and what it includes, as opposed to a community who their goal is to counteract colonial narratives about language. For example, the colonial narrative that languages are homogenous. Instead, they want to celebrate language diversity. They want to celebrate dialectal variety. the dictionary that comes out of that revitalization movement will look very different. And then you'll have communities that want to do both, and that dictionary, if there's one or multiple, will also look different. So there's an explicit recognition that this umbrella genre, like the dictionaries can look very different within it, really based on the revitalization efforts that are in the community. And the third aspect is the fact that we recognize that dictionaries alone are not sufficient to revitalize a language. To really be a revitalization dictionary, it has to be part of a revitalization movement or effort that is larger than itself. There are definitely dictionaries out there. I've run across several that are created, and the author, would like it to be used to revitalize a language, but the author is either not a community member or did not consult with community members, is not in dialogue with the larger revitalization effort. And so even though that was the intention, it doesn't really serve that purpose because it is not built with the goals and the beliefs about language in mind that the revitalization effort has. So this revitalization lexicography genre really is a connected genre to revitalization overall. So what dictionaries fall within this genre? Well, I have one example. That would be the one that I worked on. Here we are on the Google Play Store. If you type in Tunica English Dictionary, you're the first hit. Merriam-Webster comes up second, which I guess they just dominate the dictionary search key there. So I do want to give you an example and show you some things, some of the decisions we've made for this dictionary. But given that a revitalization dictionary really needs to be firmly grounded in a larger revitalization movement, we really need to get the context of Tunica revitalization first, and then we'll swing back to the dictionary. So Tunica is one of the heritage languages of the Tunica Biloxi tribe of Louisiana. They actually have 4 heritage languages, Tunica and Biloxi, as you would expect, Avoyelle and Ofo as well, and also French, so 5 at least. This picture here on the right is the parish, the Avoyelles Parish. That's not the whole city of Marksville, but this is where the reservation is located. The Tunica Biloxi tribe is federally recognized. They've been recognized since 1981. And most of the enrolled members live in or around Marksville, with some other groups living in Chicago and Houston and a few other places. So prior to starting language revitalization of Tunica, there was emblematic use of the Tunica language around the reservation. And by emblematic, I mean there were words such as hachka for corn, or lapuch, that would be a good thing or a good thing. You could hear those being spoken sort of as part of a dialogue that would normally otherwise be in English. Also, there were memorized songs, stories that were being recited, and even in very public venues. But there was not any productive language use prior to 2010. By that, I mean, if you ask someone, how do I say X? Or to give a variation on a sentence that had been memorized, they were not able to do that. There were no speakers. The language was written, the language was recorded, and that was something that some folks did have access to and how they would continue to memorize these stories and whatnot. But the productive language use wasn't there in 2010. So along comes 2010, and we see the birth of the Tunica Language Project. The Tunica Language Project is a community-owned and community-driven revitalization project that started when Councilwoman Brenda Lintinger, seen here, approached Tulane University and the linguistics program, which is in New Orleans, about 3.5 hours, 4 hours away from Marksville. And she came with a request to help decipher some particularly technical parts of some of these published manuscripts that I mentioned to help create a Tunica prayer. That was sort of the first initial collaboration. And after that work, it was decided that, yeah, a long-term relationship to actually continue to revitalize the language would be really beneficial. And so that's when the project really started in earnest. That collaboration between the Tunica Biloxi tribe and Tulane is still ongoing to this day. That's how I was involved. I was a Tulane grad student and became involved when I started there. At any given time, there are about 10 Tulane students and alumni working with a similar number of Tunica teachers, language apprentices, learners, and language activists. Here is a photo of a variety of folks from the tribe, master teachers, as well as some of our language apprentices and linguists. So there are a good number of folks collaborating on a variety of different projects, not just the dictionary, but a variety of different efforts. And when we started the Tunica Language Project, we did not start with a dictionary. And I think it's really important to point out that in the case of Tunica, a dictionary was not a pressing or immediate need in the revitalization effort. Since Tunica at the time was sleeping, really the immediate priority was to take the Tunica language that was found in very inaccessible technical media and make it more accessible, more engaging for learners, and in a variety of different medium like classroom materials and pamphlets and signage. So to give you an example of what I mean by what technical media, this is an excerpt from a grammar that was published in the 1940s. It is a fantastic grammar. It was published by Mary Haas, who did a lot of work with the last speaker of Tunica in the 40s. This is a very rich grammar and really drives a lot of what we know about Tunica today and how we've revitalized Tunica. That said, it is a rough read. Just, pick a sentence off this page and they're all pretty hard to read. Let's see. These consist of the semifactive endings plus the conditional postfix e and may be used in place of any fusional endings described above in the first two rules. Oh my goodness. It is a rough read, and that really is, not going to engage folks with the language. So the first priorities were to get these materials out of the published materials. And so, and also unpublished materials actually eventually came across manuscripts housed by the APS. So here we see pictured two of our master teachers, Donna Parit and Elizabeth Parit, tabling at Jazz Fest in New Orleans. They were really instrumental in this initial process of getting things, particularly into teaching materials. They both have experience, and particularly Miss Donna experienced teaching a variety of languages. So that was the goal. In our early years, things that we produced were things like children's books, to get the language in these very beautifully illustrated books and distributed throughout the tribe. And these stories that are in here are stories that were published by Mary Haas in one of her publications. So that was a goal that we worked on. Also, not just teaching traditional songs, but also translating other songs into Tunica. So here we see Oni Motiniku, which again was written by Donna and Elizabeth Parit, and I will give you a brief sampling here. Oni Motinik Uktalia Hilata. So there's actually great. They have a whole set of carols around the holidays that you can all sing in Tunica, and they go caroling. So that was an effort that was time was spent on, because not only do you need to find the words for these things, but actually make new words. For example, snowman was not something that was in recorded Tunica in the 1940s. So that was part of that ongoing effort. Another, and really, this has been a very long project. I sigh because we are finally in the process of getting this published. This is a pedagogical grammar, a grammar that could be distributed, taking that really highly technical grammar that we saw a few slides back and making it more accessible. We've been working on this project for 9 or more years probably, and so have piloted chapters and lessons and a variety. Finally have it all together. But that has really been a big part of that effort. How do you explain these grammatical lessons in a way that makes sense to learners and native English speakers and people who don't know what fusional and conditional postfix are? Honestly, there's sometimes the sentences, even I have to scratch my head. So this is to really make it accessible and distributable throughout all of the tribal members. So we had taken these texts, you can see here, these are the three, this is called the Boazian Trinity of Mary Haas's work. She did a book of texts, a grammar in the center, and then a dictionary on the right. And so we had really taken a lot of the content of the two on the left and updated them. But the dictionary we kind of used as is. We all had photocopies of the dictionary. The University of California Press did release the copyright to the Tunica Biloxi tribe, so we were able to distribute it amongst our group. We would kind of use what we had. But as the revitalization effort continued and matured, and there were lots more materials distributed, this dictionary became less and less useful. So that is there. So let me show an example of how this dictionary became less useful. So this is just one example. One is that the writing system changed. So what you see above is one of the stories that was published in one of those materials in the 1940s by Mary Haas. That looks very different than what we have today, which is below. Some really things that jump out, a lot less accents. There's no question marks. We use an apostrophe instead of a question mark. We don't use any letters with hacheks, which are the little V's above the C's and the S's. Instead, we use CH and SH because the sound is sh and ch. So that made a lot more sense to folks who are learning the language. So that was, on a surface level, that was one of the reasons why we didn't really love giving a dictionary to new learners who would only encounter Tunica in the new writing system, because they'd have to then learn the old writing system. But honestly, even that we dealt with for a few years. If you're a particularly motivated learner, we would teach you the writing system and we'd give you pages of the dictionary and help you with that. So that wasn't really the tipping point. The tipping point really became the fact, as I mentioned before, that this dictionary was not designed for revitalization. It wasn't really even designed for production. So I'll explain what that means here in a second. So here you have a Tunica to English side of the dictionary, and then we'll show you in a second the reversed English to Tunica. So if you have a Tunica word that you're trying to figure out the meaning to, there's a lot of information on this side of the dictionary. There is grammatical information. So you see this TG in the very first entry here. That stands for Tunica grammar. So it links you back to some grammatical information. There are discussions of possible interpretations down here where you see with Nachka. There's cultural information down here. You see with the Nakatawatani, which the beetle. And there's even literal translations. So you've got a lot of information that you can glean and learn about Tunica if you have a Tunica word that you're trying to find an English for. But if you have an English word and you want to know how do I say this in Tunica, you don't get a ton of information. You get a word, no doubt, but that's it. You get very few parts of speech. You get no cultural information, no literal translations. It's just the English word to the Tunica word. And when Mary Haas designed this dictionary, it made sense. She designed this dictionary to be published with the stories, the book of texts that she published. So she assumed that folks who were trying to use the dictionary were looking at her text, reading the Tunica, and then trying to go and figure out what it meant in English. She didn't expect folks to be thinking in English and then trying to create Tunica. So, a very great dictionary, well, I'll get into a fairly serviceable dictionary for if you have Tunica. But we're not doing that anymore. Now we have students who are running around trying to say, like, how do I say watercolors? And what's the word for hummingbird? When we have our language camps, our students are very enthusiastic, and they will, as our language, any teachers on the call can attest, often get bombarded with, how do I say dragon? Okay, all right. So really a lot of enthusiasm, but this is not something we can hand to them in a lot of ways for reasons like this. So for example, this is the word for wheel. And it's wheel of a wagon. And so we're like, well, wheel of a car, wheel of a scooter. Yeah, we can probably reuse that word, right? Like wheels are wheels. So we'll just use that word. And so that started getting used a little bit. And then someone at some point was like, wait a second, it starts with riku. Isn't riku wood? Like, why would a car have wooden wheels? And so if you go and you look up on the Tunica side, you see very clearly that, yeah, it is definitely a reference to wood. And for kind of new uses of this word, you probably want to drop the rihku part on the beginning and just say, you know, koratolni, rather than rihku koratolni. So, you know, little things like that that kind of came up that people were sort of like, wait a second, that doesn't seem quite right. That would cause a little confusion. And so among our learners, really wanting to try to help them navigate that confusion without having to do two lookups and expect them to look on both sides of the dictionary. It can get even more problematic, though, if you're trying to produce Tunica and you don't have any information. So, for example, down at the bottom here on the right, you see this word hate, to be full of hate. This is the only word that we have to express any kind of dislike. And so while we've since created new neologisms, initially we're like, well, do I actually hate it? Like, can you say like, oh, I hate Brussels sprouts? Like, sure. And so, but then you go to the Tunica side of things and you get a lot more information, including the fact that this is basically cursing. And then you really, really don't want to use it for just disliking Brussels sprouts mildly. So things like that, where this old dictionary just really didn't work for conveying all the information that's needed because it's not a production dictionary. So, all right, it's not great for going from English to Tunica, but let's say we have Tunica. Now we've got a lot of new Tunica materials that are just in Tunica. So what if I want to just look up Tunica? So for, I didn't highlight it here. So the fourth line down, we've got this word towok at the beginning of the sentence. So you're like, all right, I'm listening to the song. I want to know what tawok means. I want to use the Haas Dictionary to do that. But you go to the Haas Dictionary and you do not see it listed. That is because the tas on a lot of Tunica verbs are agentive, which is basically equivalent to the English So, you know, teacher, washer, dryer, biker. The ta is the way you say the person or the thing that does it, the person who teaches, the thing that dries. So because so many words start with ta, Haas did not list them under ta. Because that would just be really long. Instead, she lists it under wohku. So you've got to know to drop the ta, and then you've got to go to wohku, and there you can actually see it listed under there. It is literally a head coverer or a hat. So even in terms of figuring out, you've got Tunica and you want to go to the English, there were some assumptions of the knowledge of the person using the dictionary, that they would have some base grammatical assumptions or knowledge. And that wasn't something that we could necessarily assume for our learners who are learning from scratch. And we didn't want them to go to a dictionary and be like, well, can't find it, I guess I'm done, and get frustrated with the fact the dictionary didn't have what they needed. So we clearly needed a new dictionary. And so let's go back to this definition again. Now we'll get the English. Yanatamechu ikich luchchi wopiratich translates to, if you bring a dictionary, the language would be rekindled. So there was this sense that we wanted a dictionary. We wanted a dictionary to help with revitalization. But why a dictionary? Well, the initial answer was like to revitalize. Okay, well, what does that mean? What are we actually looking for a dictionary to do and to contribute to our efforts? So what's really interesting is that this pursuit of getting a dictionary actually prompted us to reflect on our own revitalization and the goals for revitalization. What were we trying to do by bringing back the language? Dictionary aside, just in general, what were we trying to do? What were our end goals? What were things that were important to us as we revitalize? And then how do we want that reflected in the dictionary? So this process of actually creating a dictionary was this really fascinating feedback loop over several years. We would think about how we wanted the language to be represented or included or excluded from the dictionary. And then that would inform us about our beliefs about language, which would then inform the dictionary, which would then inform other projects. So actually the process of creating a dictionary was a really important one for us, just even before we put pen to paper, considering why we wanted a dictionary, what we were trying to do with it. It helped our revitalization. So in thinking about a dictionary, we started to think about what goals do we have? And so these were some that we came up with. We came up with a variety of goals for revitalization, and then figured out how we would fold those goals into our dictionary. I'll highlight just a couple of them that I think are important. So one of the first goals that we came up with, or not even goals, let's use the word ideology here. So it's more of beliefs about language. What is important to us as we revitalize the language? So one thing that was very important very early on and has driven a lot of conversations in revitalization is this sense that transparent Tunica word forms are more easily learned and more easily understood. And so we really need them to be transparent in all of the things that we publish. So we would take words that are kind of squashed together and separate them out, or include what's called morphological transparency all the way through. So that is something that we did incorporate into the dictionary. Another ideology that we continue to have, is that the grammar, at the time that it was collected in the 1940s, the grammar of Tunica language had many years of contact, a few centuries of contact with Europeans. And at the time that the language was being collected, there was also this really sharp shift of language decline. Mary Haas worked with the last speaker. And so there's some places where you see kind of different ways of viewing the world through the grammar that both are acceptable. And it's very likely that either A, both were acceptable due to centuries of contact, or that there was this language decline and therefore the speakers, the Sosriushigan, was operating more in European languages and therefore saw them both sort of as equivalent. Regardless of why they're both presented in the existing documentation, the Tunica Language Project feels that the grammar that encapsulates Tunica worldview, we want to emphasize that over the grammar that encapsulates the European worldview. I'll give examples of that here in a second. And the last language ideology is that new Tunica words are just as authentic as words that were written and published in older materials, as long as they're grammatically Tunica. So words that are created by students at summer camps or for teachers as part of classroom learning, those are all authentic Tunica, and that they should be represented just the same alongside older Tunica as well. All right, so a quick example here of transparent word forms. So this is something I will say that major world language dictionaries also struggle with. How much information, how transparent do you need to be in dictionaries? In English, you see this, we kind of have non-transparent forms like that went is the past tense of go. Not only are those very different, but like they're alphabetically in complete opposite parts of the dictionary. And so it's not likely that a person on their own, if they don't know English, can link the two as being related. And so you often see both of those in the dictionary. In the published dictionary, the kind of word forms that were highly irregular were not transparent. So you wanted to change that. So here's the published dictionary. So you want to say the word I know something. Great. So you go to the English, erusa. Okay, so maybe if you really think about it, you're going to go to the Tunica side of things, just because that will get you the most information. Here you see erusa and erunasa. Okay, it's a little more information, and there's a link to the point to the Tunica grammar. Here's where it actually explains in a very inaccessible way the various forms. It doesn't list out the forms, it tells you the various forms that they could be, and whether it's plural or dual plural. And so that is, not transparent. So for the new Tunica dictionary, erusa in particular and erunasa are, there's a lot of different forms. Actually, here we'll show them all there. So we wanted to say on the English side of things, hey, heads up, this is a highly irregular verb, and there's going to be an appendix in this dictionary that you can go to and not have to go to another text to your grammar book or something to figure it out. Eventually, we do want this appendix to be just a hyperlink. We haven't quite gotten to that level yet of being able to click on it in a digital format and taking you to to the materials, but that is the goal, to bring all this information on the English side of things, because we've got folks creating language, starting with English and moving into Tunica. On the Tunica side of things, the kind of root form, erusa, it still has the most information about it. So it's got, know, I know, a note that it is irregular. Here's where you got your example sentences and other sorts of things. But the other forms, for example, he knows, orusa, that links back to erusa, so you can get more stuff, get more information, but the the form itself doesn't have as much information. We decided, particularly in the print dictionary for conservation of space, that these forms wouldn't be quite as elaborate as the erusa, but they are at least morphologically transparent. So you can figure out how she knows, you know, you all know, etc. So that is one way that this ideology that we have at large in revitalization was encoded in the dictionary, and one of the decisions we made. This one is a very interesting one. So the idea that we want to highlight Tunica worldview, grammar that reflects Tunica worldview. So to show you what that is, in the dictionary, Mary Haas puts different parts of speech, and if it could be something equally, she kind of lists both of them. So this is a verb to throw up, and it could be active verb, which is this intransitive here, which is really maps to what you would have in English, like I throw up, he throws up. It's this active thing that a person is doing. There's this agentiveness to it, agency to it. The second definition there, called transimpersonal, this doesn't map very well to English, but it is a fascinating grammatical aspect, because there is a person, it's passive. So a person who is feminine, it's marked as feminine, a female person that we have now dubbed the Stone Witch, Tishlina, is making you do it. So these kind of verbs that take this what Haas calls transimpersonal, or we call Tishlina verbs, are involuntary things. So throwing up, sweating, blinking, losing and gambling, things that are involuntary that you would not volunteer to do, or that you don't have a ton of control over, those are listed as they could be active or they could be Tishlina. And so in our dictionary, we've changed the abbreviations to be a little more transparent and have a little more methodology to them. But this verb, we list only the part of speech as this Tishlina verb, and we give lots of examples because Tishlina verbs are very fascinating. That said, if you encounter this word in stories, in texts that are older, you may see an active use of it, and it's not wrong. We don't want to say necessarily that this is wrong, it's just not preferred. And so we do have a note at the end of the entry, just letting you know that, and if folks want to use it as active, that is a correct usage of the ruhu verb. So we not only encoded this in the dictionary, not only at a headword level, but also as example sentences. So part of including example sentences that reflect Tunica practices, both historical and current, as well as stories and whatnot from the text that we have. So here we have Desmond wearing a bone breastplate at the powwow, and the Tunica Bluxi still have an annual powwow. So this is definitely still part of that, although the breastplates are not often bone now. And the Milky Way. That said, to be fair, we didn't make all of our example sentences that way, because all of our learners are living in the context of now, right? And so having references, here's a reference, to a folk song that we translated into Tunica as one of our example sentences. The highlighted words here are the headwords that would be used under. So we reflect this kind of, Tunica worldview, still recognizing that we live in today's society, and Tunica is not just what it used to be, but Tunica is who we are now and what we interact in now. So those kind of balancing those in the example sentences. Finally, this is also one of my favorites, neologisms. So as I've mentioned already, the process of revitalizing Tunica definitely has a lot of a need for words that didn't exist in published text. And there's a variety of reasons those things didn't exist in published text. And so using the dictionary to populate those words, sure, because folks may want to say different things like snowman, for example, that is now in the dictionary. But also using the dictionary as a way to normalize the fact that language is a creative process and it is ongoing, creating new words. We do it in English as well all the time, we just don't think about it. And so using the dictionary to help normalize that process and see new words as an asset and not as indicating some deficit of the language. So one of my favorite activities that still is ongoing today is doing regular neologism workshops with kids at the language camps. Here is running a workshop on new words for birds. So, sitting down with the kids, explaining, like looking at all these words and saying, hey, we don't currently have a word in Tunica for penguin. It makes total sense we don't have a word for penguin. That was not something you would just find in North America prior to zoos. But now you go to the zoo, you want to talk to your friend about a penguin. Let's talk about the process of how do we make words? How do we debate what words we want to use? And then how do we decide on a word and use it together? And so this has become a great fun activity. We cut out little pieces of paper that will be for like affixes and suffixes, so kids don't even need to know the grammar per se, the order. You can just see by the shape of the piece of paper what goes where. And it's fascinating some of the conversations that these kids are engaged in. One group in this particular exercise had a really heated debate about peacocks because one kid felt that peacocks were aggressive and dangerous, and any word for peacock that did not indicate that was just not a valid word for peacock. So they really get enthusiastic about this and really fired up and really engaged in the language. And then they have these conversations and then they start using the words amongst themselves. So we actually do include words now in the dictionary and we indicate who created them. We don't publish who created them because again, we don't want to mark these as new words per se, but we have it in our database and kids get credit for which ones they've made. So it's become a really fun event. And again, this is just for like, oh, we have a dictionary, we need these words, but this driving this process of revitalization in general and the way in which the learners see their own language. So if you bring a dictionary, the language will be rekindled. The dictionary today is really and highly used, particularly in the language camps and the classrooms that I showed a few pictures of before and that are continued ongoing. The master teachers have weekly classes that go throughout the year. And these apps are updated. The nice thing about electronic dictionaries is that we can update them pretty regularly. We have not committed to printing the dictionary yet. We have a few, there's some more edits that are happening, particularly around example sentences that we want to get edited and vetted and approved by the community before we publish that. But this dictionary allows you to search, you can search whole words, you can search partial words, which has been really great. And actually, this is a slightly older version of the dictionary. I update the background color every time I make a big update because the language is ongoing, right? Kids want to see their words in the dictionary. Oh, well, I need to make a new version. So I can actually look and see just by looking at their app what version of the what version they're on. If you're not on the green version yet, update to the green version, and then you'll see your word. So that has been a nice thing for that. We also have this webinary. This allows you to access it from any web browser. This is largely what our iPhone users use. Unfortunately, this app on the previous page, it's only Android at the moment. We're still working on getting it in the iPhone format. Yeah, this is these are our dictionaries. They're really innovative and continue to be ongoing. We're talking about actually starting to use comments and whatnot for the dictionary to allow users to continue those dialogues about what is language, how do we use it, and keep these dictionaries in step with the ongoing revitalization process. So thank you so much, Tikash Hotu. I hope that this was useful and enlightening for some of your own projects or dictionaries that you use. Dictionaries are powerful, dictionaries are exciting, and thank you for letting me share our work with you today.
Thank you, Patricia. That was a really wonderful presentation, and I think, can't speak for the audience, but I think everyone has enjoyed it, judging by the great questions that are coming in. They're all really good, so I'm just gonna go through them in order received and see how many we can do. Sound good?
Yeah,
okay, so first up is Christine Schreier, and she asks, I'm curious if you've also considered revitalization pedagogical grammars, and how have you approached the development of the grammar in association with the dictionary?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So in the case of Tunica, this revitalization pedagogical grammar, the work on creating it started before we actually talked about making a dictionary. And that was kind of seen as what would drive, dictionaries are collections of vocab, right? And so just having a list of vocab isn't going to necessarily allow people to use it in a grammatical sentence. So we saw making a grammar that actually showed how do you put the words together, what are the conjugations, that was more the priority to start with. So we started there, but in the process of creating the dictionary, there have been some very interesting conversations around grammar that have kind of fed each other back and forth. As I mentioned, the pedagogical grammar that I showed way earlier, that we're just publishing now, but it's been in process for the last 9 years or so. So the dictionary and the grammar have in some ways sort of grown up together, and things like we want in the pedagogical grammar to have words, all words for all grammatical things in Tunica as well. So how do you say something like adjective or verb? And so there were kind of these back and forth from the dictionary of how do we make that word, and then how do we abbreviate them, and kind of feeding this back and forth. And also there were some things as I was going through the dictionary and the conversation that I mentioned about kind of the grammatical worldview, which one do we want to prefer and highlight? That ideology really kind of came out of a question when I was going through the dictionary and said, hey, there's two parts of speech, what do we want to do? That question came out before we wrote this chapter on the grammar, or kind of highlighted these Tishlina verbs, and it really informed how we were going to teach the grammar as well. So they definitely worked hand in hand, even though that wasn't necessarily our intention when we started out. Questions about one would lead to changes in the other.
Makes sense. Next question is from Agnes Trouillet, who asks, thank you very much for the presentation. Who are the learners, age groups, native versus non-native regions, and how does the revitalization program overall promote the project? Notably, how do you reach out to universities for inclusion in language programs, and with what result?
Yeah, thank you for your question. So the age range is fairly wide. The majority are definitely younger. So there is a language camp that happens every year, and then ongoing classes that are from 5 to 18. I would say just in terms of numbers, those are probably most of our learners. We get, I think we've gotten up to 60 kids in a year, and they are classes for them ongoing throughout the year too. The summer camp is where they all sort of come together, but we also, the master teachers engage with them throughout the year as well. That said, probably some more proficient learners are adults or older teens. And some of the older teens have been learning Tunica for quite a number of years now. So you saw our apprentices, sort of, younger 20s, 30s. And we've had a few elders participate, and they kind of come in and out of the classes. So the age range definitely in terms of who are the number is probably younger, but in terms of proficiency, it gets a little bit older there. The learners are largely all Tunica Biloxi people. The classes are, well, actually, I don't know how, I know at times we've offered like workshops to the public, but a lot of them are sponsored and put on by the Tunica Biloxi tribe. The tribe has a dedicated program, the Language and Culture Revitalization Program, that offers classes and resources to tribal members. So those are definitely most of the learners. The non-native there are non-native learners, and I'd say those are mostly the folks that come in via Tulane. So that's kind of the makeup of the group. In terms of regions, it's really where tribal members are. So in Louisiana, a little bit in Texas, a little in Chicago. There's also, we've been doing ongoing projects, and folks, you know, people move now. So we've got some people working on the project who are in Florida, some who are in the state of Washington. But again, they are affiliated with the tribe in some way, either as heritage learners or as enrolled members. So that's kind of the makeup of the group. Promoting the project, I mean, really, honestly, most of the promotion we do within the tribe and the region. So I would say Tunica definitely has sort of an academic presence just because it is affiliated with Tulane, and a lot of students and whatnot do presentations and things like that. So we've done collaborative presentations as well as presentations that just the students do in conferences. But that's not necessarily the goal of revitalization. That's part of, you know, what unfortunately in academia you have to do in order to make it through tenure and things like that. So we have the Tunica Biloxi tribe is in a lot of collaboration with area tribes, and that's through their own connections and through their own their own relationships. And so that's very cool. I mean, this is part of a community-led revitalization, right? They get to pick where it goes and who they interact with. And so there's been a lot of collaboration. They put on like stickball workshops with other tribes and basket making, and have attended even some revitalization conferences specific to the Southeast. So that's sort of the way that the revitalization is. There is not a goal to get it in a university setting currently in terms of teaching Tunica. That said, as part of the summer camp, Tulane offers a class to undergraduate students that trains them in some Tunica, and then they help be camp counselors at the summer camp. So that helps just give a number of adults to those 60 kids and who know some language. So that's kind of the only university, I would say, a formal class that exists. Yeah.
Thank you. So yeah, we have about 15 questions already. We apologize in advance to people questions we won't be able to get to. We will share those with Patricia, and if she's able to, she may.
I'll try to be faster in my answers too.
That's fine. But so I'm going to try to combine a couple related ones. One question was a person asked, does Tunica have a full set of grammatical terms to describe own words? Like you used the example of Tishlina. You know, how do you create these kinds of words? And the related question was, are learners intimidated by terms like class 1 intransitive verbs? And is that creating these Tunica terms like a way to overcome that kind of intimidation factor of grammatical sounding things?
Yeah, so we do have a full set of grammatical terms. However, those were ones that we created. It did not come with any of the previous texts. So those are things that were created by the Tunica working group. So folks on the tribe, as well as Tulane linguists or Tulane students. We switched to words like class 1 and Tishlina because the words that were there before were even more inaccessible. So we had like, you know, this is a causative transitive verb we felt was not as transparent as a class 2 verb. And so there was a lot of debate around that at a period of time. And now I think it's pretty standard. I know some of the teachers who are in the classes every week could speak to it better than I can. But from my interaction with students during summer camps and online is that doesn't seem intimidating. And part of the grammar is that we do explain the difference between those and try to make it a little more accessible than like transimpersonal verbs and whatnot.
Thank you. Another question, were there any words or concepts that Haas included in her dictionary that the team chose not to publish or in the dictionary because, say, it represented private, sacred, gender knowledge or something else, some other reason?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. We have not excluded anything to my knowledge. There's a few things that we excluded due to the fact that it wasn't really complete and therefore was more confusing than anything else. But in Tunica, there is not, those texts don't hold anything that the tribe has deemed that they want to keep for themselves and not share with the public. So that is definitely part of why we have this whole vetting process before we are going to publish it in a print form, so it's more out there. Yeah, no, the Tunica language documents, just basically even before we get to revitalization, don't contain a lot of the sacred knowledge type information. So yeah.
Great, thank you. Another should be fairly simple. Heather Suter asks, are there apps available? Are the apps available for download for non-community members or outside of the US, like in Canada?
Yes, they are available for download and accessible. So the versions of the apps they only have example sentences and things like that that have been vetted by the community. So the digital forms you will see aren't quite as complete as the print form is, and the digital form eventually will be. But the Tunica Biloxi tribe is very public and generous with the language in terms of sharing it. They want to share it. I know that is not always the case in certain communities, that it need to keep it private for a variety of very legitimate reasons. But that's not the case in the Tunica Biloxi tribe, and they have a lot of the language public on their Facebook and on their website. So yeah, you can download it from the Google Play Store is the Android form, or the Webinary is also available.
Thank you. There's a few questions about wanting to know more about the, so I'll read one formulation of it. I'm curious about how to know if there's a specific institutionalized process for considering, accepting, rejecting new word proposals. So like in some communities, there's a committee to evaluate proposals, including competing proposals. And other questions ask, like, how do you deal with, if there have been any sort of disagreements about how to work out a major issue? Is there like what's the process for that look like?
Yeah, so in terms of a formal specific process for accepting, rejecting new words or considering them, we don't currently have one that's sort of available year round, although it has been talked about. But now that these dictionaries are being used a little more and folks are commenting on them, there's been a talk about some sort of more formal process. The process right now is often usually someone if you can't find it in the dictionary, either someone emails one of the master teachers, and then they tend to come to make something themselves using their own vast knowledge of Tunica, or if they're unsure, then possibly consult the Tunica working group. So that's kind of the informal process. Or we have these summer camps, and we'll kind of go through conversations about them. But when does it actually meet that threshold of, okay, this is now accepted? We don't have formal criteria yet. We have chatted about it. It is kind of more informal, and the sort of noticing, me as a lexicographer often noticing, like, oh, that's cool, those kids are using that new word, that seems like a word. I'm definitely more of the descriptive bend of lexicographers, so if I hear folks using it, I'll tend to bring it up to the group and say, I heard folks using it this way, like, can we put it in the dictionary? So yeah, it's a really good question and something we're in process about. In terms of things that have been in very strong disagreement, yeah, there's a process. So we very much operate on consensus. So not putting things forward if anyone disagrees, no matter how strongly or not. So things are often very lengthy, as community revitalization is supposed to be, and as revitalization honestly is supposed to be. It's be lengthy, get consensus. We have lots of Google documents documenting decisions and things we've made over the years, and then we go back and reinvent them and rework them as kind of disagreements come up. So yeah, it's definitely a process that takes time, as it should be, and the Tunica Biloxi people have the final say on anything, for sure.
That's great. So it's just after the 1 hour mark. We still have a few more questions to go, but which indicates how great this was received. And many of the questions are just saying this was a fantastic talk and looking forward to the book, as many of us are. So we're going to wrap it up there and say thank you to everyone for attending. We really appreciate you taking the time today. I'll say thank you again to Patricia. It was a wonderful talk. And we'll share the questions, and we look forward to you to, if you can join us for future events. There's some info in the chat about that as well. In the meantime, I hope everyone is well and your family and friends as well. And please take care, and we hope to be able to say hello in person again very soon.